It was a bright Friday afternoon when Richard Bennett, a well-known millionaire businessman, decided to leave work early for the first time in years. His employees were shocked. Mr. Bennett was the kind of man who never left his office before sunset. But today, something inside him whispered, "Go home." He didn't know why, but he listened. He wanted to surprise his family, to see how things were when he wasn't around. As his black car pulled into the massive driveway of his mansion, Richard noticed something strange. The house, usually quiet and spotless, was filled with laughter. Children's laughter. But he had only one daughter, Emily, and she rarely laughed that freely since her mother passed away 2 years ago. Curious, Richard stepped out quietly and walked toward the sound coming from the garden. There, under the warm sun, he saw a sight that froze him. Emily was laughing, running around the garden, running. His little girl, who hadn't walked properly since the accident, was chasing Bubbles with the housemaid, Clara. Richard's eyes widened. For months, he had spent thousands on doctors, therapists, and specialists around the world, but none of them had managed to get Emily to even stand without pain. Yet here she was, smiling, running, playing, with someone he had barely noticed before. Clara, dressed in her simple uniform, was cheering Emily on. "That's it, sweetheart. One more step," she said with pure joy. Richard stood there, hidden behind the pillar, unable to move. He watched as Clara gently encouraged his daughter, holding her little hands, clapping, and laughing together. Emily's face glowed with happiness, something Richard hadn't seen in years. He felt his throat tighten. How long had it been since he last laughed with his daughter? How long had he been buried in meetings, numbers, and endless work, believing money could fix everything? For the first time, he saw that love and time were the real medicines, and he had given her neither. When Emily finally noticed him, she squealed, "Daddy. Look. I can walk." She ran toward him, her tiny legs wobbling, but her face shining with pride. Richard dropped to his knees, tears flooding his eyes. He hugged her tightly, unable to speak. Clara stood a few steps away, smiling through her own tears. How did this happen?" Richard asked softly, still holding Emily close. Clara looked down shyly. "Sir, I just talked to her. Every day. Told her she was brave. That she could do it. I didn't want her to be afraid anymore." Richard stared at her, realizing the truth. It wasn't expensive therapy that healed his daughter. It was kindness. Patience. Faith. Things he had forgotten in his world of luxury. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He walked around the quiet halls of his mansion, thinking about all the moments he had missed, Emily's birthdays, her first words after the accident, the lonely nights she must have spent waiting for him. He entered her room quietly and found Clara sitting by Emily's bedside, reading her a story. Emily was already asleep, her little hand resting on Clara's arm. "Clara," Richard said softly. She turned, startled. "Sir, I was just—" "Thank you," he interrupted, his voice breaking. "You gave me back my daughter." Clara shook her head. "No, sir. She just needed someone to believe in her again." Richard smiled sadly. "And I forgot how to do that." The next morning, something changed in the Bennett household. Richard canceled his business meetings and spent the entire day with Emily. They baked cookies, painted silly pictures, and watched cartoons together. For once, he didn't check his phone, didn't care about profits or losses. He just lived, something he hadn't done in years. Days turned into weeks, and Emily's recovery became a miracle that even her doctors couldn't explain. But Richard knew the truth. It wasn't a miracle of medicine, it was a miracle of love. He began to see his staff differently, treating them like family instead of employees. He even helped Clara pursue her dream of becoming a physical therapist, offering her a scholarship to study further. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Richard stood by the window, watching Emily and Clara play in the garden. A smile crept across his face. He whispered to himself, "I came home early that day, and it changed my life forever." He realized that wealth wasn't about what you have in your bank, it was about what you have in your heart. And for the first time in years, Richard felt rich again. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more.